"Lieutenant, we need to move," barked Sergeant Kira Lang, her voice sharp but tinged with worry. She knelt beside him, her dark eyes scanning his injury. "Can you stand?" Andrew shook his head. "Not a chance. Legs busted. You'll have to leave me." Kira's jaw tightened. "Not an option. It's an order," Andrew snapped, though his voice lacked the bite of authority. He knew Kira wouldn't abandon him. She was too stubborn for that. But time was running out and the Cliveth were closing in. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed through the air. A low, pulsating hum that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. The Cliveth stopped in their tracks, their movements halting as if frozen by some invisible force. The battlefield grew eerily silent, save for the hum, which grew louder and more erratic. Andrew's eyes widened. The Cliveth were retreating? He watched in disbelief as the alien soldiers turned in unison and began to withdraw, their precise ranks dissolving into chaos. "What the hell just happened?" Kira whispered, her gaze darting between Andrew and the retreating enemy. "I have no idea," Andrew admitted, his voice tinged with awe. But deep down, he felt an odd sense of connection to the moment, as if his injury had somehow triggered the shift. It wasn't until later, after the humans had regrouped and taken refuge in an underground bunker, that the truth began to unravel. Among the survivors was Dr. Elena Morozov, a biologist who had been studying the Cliveth since their arrival. She approached Andrew with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, carrying a portable scanner in one hand. "Lieutenant Carter," she began, her Russian accent soft but precise. "May I examine your injury?" Andrew frowned but nodded. "Sure. But I don't see what my leg has to do with anything." As Elena ran the scanner over his broken limb, her expression shifted from confusion to astonishment. "This is extraordinary," she murmured. "What is?" Kira asked, leaning over to peer at the scanner. Elena pointed to the display, which showed an intricate web of neural activity surrounding Andrew's injury. The Cliveth are highly sensitive to electromagnetic fields, especially those generated by biological systems. When a human experiences intense physical trauma, the body emits a unique electromagnetic signal, a sort of distress beacon. For reasons we don't fully understand, this signal interferes with the Cliveth hive mind. Andrew blinked. "You're saying my broken leg scared off an entire alien army?" "Not scared," Elena corrected. "Disrupted. The Cliveth rely on their collective consciousness to function. Your injury created a signal that fragmented their connection, forcing them to retreat." The room fell silent as the weight of Elena's words sank in. Andrew, Kira, and the others exchanged glances, a mixture of disbelief and hope sparking in their eyes. "So, what does this mean for us?" Andrew asked. "It means we have a weapon," Elena said, her voice firm. "If we can replicate this signal, we might be able to disrupt the Cliveth on a larger scale. But it won't be easy. The signal is tied to human pain and trauma, which presents ethical and practical challenges." Andrew grimaced. "You're saying we need to hurt ourselves to win?" Elena hesitated. "Not necessarily. With the right technology, we could simulate the signal without causing real harm. But we'll need time to develop it, and time is something we don't have much of." Over the next few days, the humans worked tirelessly to devise a way to weaponize the electromagnetic signal. Engineers rigged makeshift devices to amplify and broadcast the frequency, while medics tended to injured soldiers who volunteered to endure controlled pain for testing purposes. Andrew, despite his injury, played a central role in the effort, lending his knowledge of battlefield tactics to coordinate the deployment of the new weapon. When the Cliveth launched their next assault, the humans were ready. As the alien soldiers approached, their movements as precise and terrifying as ever, Andrew and his team activated the signal emitters. The effect was instantaneous. The Cliveth froze mid-stride, their forms trembling as the hive-mind connection fractured. Some collapsed, their exoskeletons shattering like fragile glass, while others fled in disarray. Cheers erupted among the human ranks as the Clivith retreated once again, their once unstoppable advance reduced to chaos. For the first time since the war began, humanity had a fighting chance. In the aftermath, Andrew sat on the edge of a makeshift cot, his leg in a sturdy brace. Kira approached him, a rare smile gracing her usually stoic features. "You did it," she said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Your broken leg just turned the tide of the war." Andrew chuckled, though his eyes were weary. "Guess I'll have to break the other one next time." Kira laughed, a sound that was equal parts relief and exhaustion. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As the humans prepared for the battles to come, they knew the war was far from over. But they also knew they had something the Clivith couldn't adapt to, the indomitable spirit of a species that refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And if a broken leg could bring an alien army to its knees, then perhaps humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to turn its pain into power. The days that followed felt like a blur of exhaustion, hope, and grim determination. Word of the signal weapon spread quickly through the ranks of the resistance, and soldiers from every outpost clamored to learn how it worked. Field medics and engineers became an unlikely but critical alliance, with one side focused on understanding the biological source of the signal and the other focused on how to amplify and transmit it. Andrew Carter had unwittingly become a legend, a symbol of how even the most ordinary human flaw, like a broken leg, could tip the scales of war. Soldiers began to call it Carter Signal, and while Andrew wasn't thrilled about being known for breaking his leg, he couldn't deny the power of the story. The idea of a single, injured human sending an alien army into a panic was the kind of inspiration the resistance desperately needed. But inspiration wasn't enough. It wouldn't win the war. "Listen up," Andrew said to a room full of engineers, soldiers, and medics gathered in one of the underground bunkers. His leg was still immobilized in a brace, and he leaned on a crutch, but his voice carried the weight of command. "The Clivith aren't going to give us time to get comfortable. They're going to adapt, and they're going to hit us hard. We need to be ready before that happens." A young engineer named Ravi nodded, his fingers twitching nervously at the hem of his jacket. "We've refined the signal amplifiers, sir. Instead of relying on actual injuries, we've managed to synthesize the electromagnetic pattern your body emitted during your injury. It's not perfect, but it's close." "Close isn't good enough," Kira said, arms crossed, her sharp gaze pinning him in place. "If the Clivith realize it's fake, they'll ignore it. We need them to react the same way they did before." "That's the problem," Ravi admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're missing something. It's not just the frequency, it's the intensity, the complexity. The signal you emitted wasn't static. It fluctuated with your heart rate, your stress levels, even your adrenaline spikes. We'd need a full-body neural feedback system to replicate it perfectly." "Then build it," Andrew said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The next 72 hours were a frenzy of activity. Human scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked side by side, each contributing what they could to develop a device capable of simulating the pain signal without requiring a human to actually experience it. Old Clivith equipment salvaged from previous battles was repurposed to increase the range of the signal, and field medics provided biometric data from other injured soldiers to fine-tune the signal's complexity. It was during one of these late-night sessions that Dr. Elena Morozov approached Andrew with an update. Her eyes had the hollow, sleep-deprived look of someone living on caffeine and adrenaline. "We've made progress," she said, sitting next to him on a crate. "But there's something you should know." "Bad news?" Andrew asked, his brow raised. "Depends on your perspective," she replied. The signal isn't just disrupting the Clivith. It's doing something to them. Something more than what we expected. Andrew leaned forward, his interest piqued. More? Like what? Elena hesitated, as if debating how much to tell him. Their nervous system doesn't just break down when they lose their connection to the hive mind. Some of them enter a kind of stasis. We've seen Clivith soldiers collapse and stop moving entirely, like they're hibernating. Wait, Andrew said slowly. You're saying the signal puts them to sleep? More like a shutdown, Elena clarified. But that's not all. The longer they stay disconnected, the harder it is for them to reconnect to the hive mind. Their individual brains aren't equipped to handle autonomy. They become disoriented. Andrew's eyes lit up with realization. They get stuck. They can't go back to the hive mind once they've been cut off for too long. Exactly, she said, giving him a wry smile. If we push them hard enough, we might not just drive them off. We could sever them from the hive mind permanently. The implications of this revelation were enormous. It meant the resistance wasn't just stalling the Clivith, they could dismantle them. Every disconnected soldier was one less enemy in the collective. The resistance didn't just have a weapon. They had a chance to win. The next Clivith assault came 3 days later. The early warning sensors picked up their approach from 12 kilometers away. Heat signatures, movement patterns, everything confirmed it was a full-scale assault. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Clivith soldiers advancing like a flood. The human resistance barely had time to brace for impact. Get the emitters online now. Andrew barked as soldiers rushed to set up the new signal generators along the perimeter. Portable towers bristling with antennas were hauled into place, while engineers checked power feeds and relays. Ravi worked feverishly at the control console, his fingers flying across the interface as he monitored signal strength and calibration. Tower 1 is online, a voice shouted over the comms. Tower 2 is live, called another. Andrew watched the wave of Clivith approaching through binoculars. They moved with their signature precision, their bodies gliding in perfect synchronization like a school of fish. But Andrew knew what was coming. Wait for it, he said, gripping the edge of a railing. Not yet. The Clivith closed the distance, their towering forms growing clearer as they moved into range. Wait for it. They were close now, close enough to see the flash of their multi-lensed eyes and the flicker of light reflecting off their exoskeletons. Now! Andrew roared. Light them up! Ravi slammed his hand on the activation switch. Instantly, the air hummed with an invisible current that vibrated in Andrew's bones. The Clivith staggered mid-stride. Some jerked spasmodically, their limbs twitching like malfunctioning machinery. Others dropped to the ground, their legs buckling beneath them. The wave of invincible alien soldiers dissolved into a broken mess of stumbling, collapsing figures. Cheers erupted from the resistance fighters, but Andrew wasn't done. More power, he shouted, limping toward Ravi. Crank it up to full blast. I want them cut off for good. Sir, if we go too high, it could burn out the capacitors. Ravi warned, his fingers hovering over the controls. Do it, Andrew barked. Ravi's jaw tightened, but he obeyed. He pushed the signal to its maximum intensity. The effect was instantaneous. The Clivith soldiers didn't just collapse, they froze. Their bodies locked up, eyes dimming as if the light behind them had been snuffed out. They didn't even twitch. Andrew turned toward Elena. Are they dead? No, Elena replied, scanning one of the fallen Clivith with a handheld device. Her eyes widened. They're conscious, but their hive link is shattered. They're trapped inside their own minds. Andrew felt a chill run down his spine. They're awake in there, trapped with their own thoughts. Looks like it, Elena said quietly, her gaze distant. And without the hive mind, They have no concept of self. They don't know what they are. For a brief moment, Andrew felt pity for them. But that pity didn't last. Not after what they'd done. Not after the cities they'd burned and the people they'd slaughtered. This is war, he muttered to himself. When it was over, nearly 80% of the Cliveth assault force was either incapacitated or disconnected from the hive mind. Those that remained fled back into the wilderness, disorganized and leaderless. Humanity had not just won the battle, they had learned how to win the war. Andrew sat on a crate at the edge of the battlefield, his crutch resting beside him. Kira sat next to him, silent for a while, watching the smoldering wreckage of the Cliveth attack force. "Can't believe it," she finally said. "A broken leg." "Huh?" "Yeah," Andrew said with a half-smile. "Guess I've got a new nickname. They're calling you Breakpoint now," Kira said with a grin. "It's fitting." He shook his head, but the grin stayed on his face. "Breakpoint," he muttered. "I'll take it." The resistance didn't waste the momentum gained from the recent victory. Word of the battle spread like wildfire through underground communication channels. From hidden bunkers in the Siberian tundra to underwater colonies off the coast of New Zealand, human survivors heard about the breakpoint strategy. The knowledge that something as simple as a broken human signal could unravel the Cliveth hive mind gave humanity something it hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time since the invasion began, humans weren't just surviving. They were winning. The command center beneath Outpost Epsilon buzzed with frenetic energy. The hum of machinery blended with the hurried footsteps of engineers, tacticians, and soldiers. Everyone had a purpose. And for once, it wasn't just delay the inevitable. Plans were being made. Offensive plans. Andrew Carter sat at the center of it all. His legs still in a brace, but his presence undeniable. Even seated, his sharp eyes followed every movement on the tactical screens. He'd been pulled into strategy sessions as an advisor, but his name carried more weight than most generals now. People listened when Breakpoint spoke. On one of the displays, a 3D map of a Cliveth outpost flickered into view. It was one of their larger command hubs, a central node for relaying orders across the region. Capturing it would cripple Cliveth coordination for miles. General Ortega, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a constant scowl, leaned over the display. One push, Ortega growled, his gravelly voice like shifting stones. One big push and we take that node. Without it, every Cliveth soldier in the region goes blind. No orders, no reinforcements, just chaos. We hit 'em hard and fast. Hard and fast is great, Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. But if we misfire the signal, they'll adapt. We only get one shot at this. Ortega eyed him, his lips curling into a smirk. Not if you're leading it. Andrew chuckled dryly. With this leg? I'm not leading anything, General. Don't need your legs, Ortega said, tapping his temple with 2 fingers. We need your head. You know the signal better than anyone. We'll build you a command module right on the front lines. Call the shots in real time. Brilliant, Kira muttered from behind them, arms crossed. Stick the guy with a broken leg on the front line. What could go wrong? I'm serious, Ortega replied, glancing at her. We put Carter in a reinforced transport. He calls the plays we run M. No one knows the Cliveth like he does. Andrew considered it, glancing at the tactical map. The Cliveth command node pulsed with red light, like a heart beating out orders to thousands of soldiers. If they could shut it down, it wouldn't just be a victory, it would be total confusion for the Cliveth. Every drone, every soldier, every walker dependent on that node would be lost in a fog of disconnection. You're right, Andrew said, nodding. I'm in. D-Day. The armored transport, nicknamed the Vanguard, rattled as it rolled across the shattered landscape. Steel plates reinforced every inch of its hull, and it bristled with turret-mounted plasma cannons. Inside, Andrew sat at the heart of the command module. Holographic screens floated around him, fed by live drone footage, sensor data, and tactical readouts. Engineers had rigged the transport with a portable version of the breakpoint signal emitter, a high-powered amplifier capable of projecting the signal across a 20-kilometer radius. Andrew's heart thudded steadily as he watched the landscape roll by on the feeds. Cliveth obelisks jutted from the ground like jagged teeth, pulsating with blue light. Their architecture always had an unsettling, organic quality, like something that grew rather than was built. Kira's voice came over the comms. "Carter, you hear me? We're 5 clicks from the target." Loud and clear, Andrew replied, tapping a button to sync their comms. "How's the advance?" "Smooth so far," she said, but there was a sharpness to her tone. Too smooth. Andrew knew what she meant. The Cliveth weren't known for letting humans stroll up to their command hubs. The lack of resistance could only mean one thing: they knew something was coming. "Keep eyes sharp," Andrew said. "If they're waiting, it's going to be ugly." The comms fell silent, but he knew his words were heated. Every soldier on the line knew what was at stake. If this operation failed, the Cliveth would learn to resist the signal. They'd never get another chance like this. The first shot wasn't plasma. It wasn't artillery. It was sound. A resonating chime, like a bell at the bottom of an ocean trench, echoed across the valley. Andrew's fingers twitched as he recognized it. The Cliveth had activated a countersignal, a disruption field designed to scramble human sensors. The Vanguard's displays flickered, static crackling along the edges of his holographic readouts. "They know we're here," Kira said grimly over the comms. "They're scrambling everything." "Not everything," Andrew muttered, reaching for the controls. "Our signal rides a different wave." He flicked the switches, activating the emitter. The hum started low, like a distant generator warming up, then built into a steady, throbbing pulse. It wasn't loud, but it felt loud. The air itself seemed to shift, the hairs on Andrew's arms standing on end. Out on the battlefield, the Cliveth began to stumble. The wave hit them like a sledgehammer to the brain. Perfectly coordinated units staggered, their hive-mind cohesion unraveling. Walkers spun in place, disoriented. Soldiers froze mid-step, their limbs locking up. "Hit them now!" Andrew barked into the comms. "All units, engage!" Kira's squad opened fire, plasma bolts ripping into the disoriented Cliveth. The aliens didn't even react. Their unblinking eyes stared at nothing, their bodies moving like marionettes with broken strings. "Direct hit on the signal." Ravi's voice came in over the line. "We're at full range." "They're cut off." The sound of battle swirled through Andrew's comm feed. Explosions, shouts, the relentless thump of artillery. But the Cliveth couldn't regroup. Without their hive mind, they were nothing but individuals lost in a world they didn't understand. But the Cliveth weren't done. A shockwave slammed into the Vanguard, tossing Andrew forward. Sparks erupted from the consoles, and the air was filled with the acrid stench of burning circuits. "Status report," he yelled, gripping the edge of his seat. "Walker just hit us." Kira's voice crackled through the comm. "Direct impact on the emitter." Andrew's eyes snapped to the emitter status display. It flickered red, damaged. The frequency was dropping, and the Cliveth were starting to move again. Their hive mind was reconnecting. "No, no, no," Andrew muttered, his fingers moving faster than his thoughts. He manually rerouted power from every non-essential system to the emitter. Lights dimmed. Weapons systems shut down. All of it went into one thing, the signal. "Come on," he growled, eyes locked on the rising frequency meter. "Come on." The hum returned, this time louder, deeper. It wasn't the soft buzz it had been before. This was a roar, like thunder rolling through stone. Every cliveth on the field went still. Every single one. Andrew's eyes widened. They weren't just confused this time. They weren't disoriented. They collapsed. Every cliveth soldier, walker, and drone dropped to the ground in unison, like puppets with their strings cut. Is it? Kira's voice was breathless. They're down, Andrew said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Every last one. The battlefield was silent. No skittering claws, no clattering limbs. Just silence. It wasn't like before where some of them had fled. This time, none of them moved. Carter, Elena's voice came in, quiet but sharp. I think you just found the kill switch. Andrew sat back in his seat, letting out a long breath. His heart pounded in his chest, and his leg throbbed with pain. Call it in, he muttered, staring at the field of lifeless cliveth. Tell command. We just ended the war. The comms went silent for a moment. Then, Kira's voice crackled through with a single word. Breakpoint. The victory at the Cliveth command node was nothing short of historic. Broadcasts of the battle spread to every resistance cell on Earth. The image of thousands of Cliveth soldiers lying motionless, their towering forms crumpled like discarded dolls, became a symbol of hope. News anchors called it the Day of Silence, while soldiers and fighters preferred a simpler name, Breakpoint. Andrew Carter, however, wasn't basking in the glory. He sat quietly in the war room, his legs still braced, eyes locked on a looping video feed of the battlefield. He watched the Cliveth fall over and over again, frame by frame. Something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. Kira sat beside him, her combat vest still stained with soot from the battle. She watched the video for a moment before nudging him with her elbow. You should be proud, she said. You just did something no one thought was possible. Yeah, Andrew muttered, still staring at the screen. That's the problem. Kira frowned. Problem? We just wiped out an entire Cliveth strike force. We cracked their hive mind. What part of that sounds like a problem? Andrew leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His fingers tapped a steady rhythm on the metal edge of the table. Look at them, he said, gesturing to the screen. They didn't just shut down. They dropped all at once. Every single one. The walkers, the foot soldiers, the drones. All of them. Yeah, that's what the signal does. Remember? Kira raised an eyebrow. That was the point. Andrew shook his head. No, it's different this time. Before, they'd stagger. They'd get confused, disoriented. But this was like someone flipped a switch and turned them all off at the same time. Kira tilted her head, considering his words. So what are you saying? We hit them too hard. I'm saying... Andrew paused, his eyes narrowing. I'm saying it felt too easy. Before Kira could respond, Dr. Elena Morozov entered the war room, her eyes sharp with urgency. She clutched a data tablet in her hand, her fingers swiping through lines of code and signal patterns. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between the screen and Andrew. We have a problem, she said, and Andrew felt his stomach twist. Yeah, Andrew muttered, standing slowly. I think I know.